Good morning. Ayin Beis. We are page 1244. Aleph Resh Mem Dalet. So two presenting questions that the Rebbe Rasha posed. After explaining how midas mature to the point that they also elevate the very intelligence and comprehension that gave birth to them and that protected them, which was called, when he spoke about aim, revitz al hafrechim, when they're still being protected by their mother, that's when the hamshach of bina into midas. And then as midas mature, they actually elevate chachma and bina, and primarily speaking about bina, the mother, to her core place, what he called the ava l'mayla metam v'das, ava b'chol me'edecha. And it's in a form of total bittul, that you lose yourself and completely consumed in this love to the point that there's no expansion, no extension, no expansion. So based on that, asked the Rebbe Rashab, what's the connection between bina, which is a defined and limited comprehension within a structure, within to b'chol me'edecha, which is bli gvul, without limits. Yes, indeed, the Zohar says that bina is that level. They call it that beli shiur klal, that it doesn't have, the exact language is that bina is les beis shiura. It doesn't have a shear, it doesn't have a measure or a limit, but that itself needs to be explained. Why? And the process, this is important. So the Zohar talks about b'chol avavcha, that he says is chesed and gvura, which from that manifests yetzer tev and yetzer hara. Yamina v'smala, right and left. Okay. B'chol nafshecha, he called that which is in between nefesh David, Yisyahevis benayhu, that he called keser malchus. We're going to learn more about this later, what this exactly means. But those are still with the measure. As he says afterwards, b'chol avavcha means it fills your being, your a structured personality. B'chol nafshecha fills all your faculties, but it's still within. Ma'itcha is something beyond. So that's what the Zohar says. So the question still remains, what's the explanation? Like he said, how do you explain bina in connection with something that's beyond limits, when bina seems to be defined by, that's what bina is, understanding an idea in a very structured way. Also, we have to understand, going back to what he said before, that the ava causes the person to become completely, with what I said was completely, what happens when something like gets concentrated? It's not the word concentrated, it's completely like, I use the word coiled up.
Encompassed? Subsumed?
No, neither of the two. Okay, it'll come to me, fine. But bottom line is that it loses its entire identity and personality. That's the language of the Zohar, the chikta de rechimu, that when the love is so intense that he cannot contain it, lo yochel lemizbo, azir is garmei. So it becomes like a nekuda. Instead of being expansive, it's like when a person is completely overwhelmed, so they completely lose themselves in the love. So his question is, how does that reconcile with the fact that b'chol ma'itcha seems to be, on the contrary, even more expansive love? B'chol avavcha, I'm looking at the top of page 1244. B'chol avavcha, mashalev make is what the heart can contain, can deal with. B'chol nafshecha is that the love has now filled up all the keiches nefesh, so the entire faculties of the person. But they still can contain it. They relate to it. It's not something that completely overwhelms them. That the nefesh and the lev, rather, and the faculties of the soul cannot contain it all. And indicates on the intensity and the expansion of the love even beyond our limits. In other words, you can have a love that is limited to your capacity, and you can have a love that's like spills over. So how do you reconcile that with what he said, that you become the opposite of expansion, completely lost in the process, where you don't have any identity at all? It seems like going the other direction. And he gave the example in the parentheses of tshuva, that when there's tshuva that is bedibur, when a person speaks, is able to pray. So dibur is murkav, it's made up of letters and words, so it's still expressed in a certain way. But when the tshuva is coming, ma'amakim, from the depths of the heart, where there it's a cry, it's just a shapeless cry. That's Tkiyah Shefer, he says. It's a kelshi efshel islabish b'dibur, a voice, a sound that's unable to be contained or manifest in speech, in words, which is a dibur that comes up yisech. That has hagbola, that's limited. But this psycho, this call of tshuva from the depths of the heart, which does not have shape and form, he says this is even more intense because it becomes even more powerful. That's why it's a cry that doesn't have words. Words are limited, like he said, divrei chacham benachas nishmaim. When the wise speak, they speak with a pleasant manner, gentle, kind, it's controlled. Avol kol poshet comes b'teikef u'bizgalus, v'yizaku v'yikru b'kel gadol. So therefore, it's much more intense. So therefore, we have the second question: how does that reconcile with what we said before? That this ava that comes as the Ma'ala Matam Vadas is completely nullifies the personality of the individual, where it seems to be that it should be more expansive, even beyond our limits. Okay, so we began to understand this. The Rebbe Rasha began. Tzarech Leimer, he said that this ava b'chol meidecha, there are two levels. The ava b'chol meidecha, which goes beyond limits, that he calls me'emek uprimis alev, from the depths and the innermost recesses of the heart, or let's say the inner recesses of the heart. Well, the ma'ala mitam v'das, that's not just commensurate to an intelligent and intellectual process. So that too has two levels, chitzenius and primis. He's going to come back to this in the next page, but to explain this, he says we have to understand first the concept of a dibur b'kel poshet, because he compares it, going back to that voice, that shapeless voice or seamless voice that comes from the cavity of the heart, the breath of the heart. So he says in the tzayka, in the cry, there are two levels. This tzayka sakel poshet that comes with a lot of noise and sound. The person cries out, and it's very prominent. But then there's a tzayka salev, and then there's a cry that doesn't necessarily makes a sound. It's just a person crying out from their innermost to God. He doesn't say explicitly that it doesn't make a sound, but it seems to be that these are the two levels. It's not perfectly clear to me, to be honest, but we'll see where this develops. We'll see how this develops, and we'll take it from there.
Doesn't make a sound, no. Tzak libam al Hashem without a sound. It's the essence of the heart.
That's what the pasuk means. Fine, accept that. Fine. Now, there's noise in the background here. Let me just give me a minute. I want to just shut the window. Okay, so he compares these two levels of B'chol Ma'itcha, the love of this unlimited love, or unbound or unfettered love, to these two levels of Tzayka. But to explain that, he begins with Dihini Yedua. And we learned this. I'm just going to sum up that the general difference between a Koel Poshet and a Koel Murkav. So we're not talking about two voices or two sounds. One that is shapeless and one that's made up of letters and words. So, Kel Murkav, he says, comes from a kavana shebemeich shebelev. It's a very deliberate expression of speech that comes through, first, there's a intentional, a concerted effort in the moyach and the lev, in the mind and the heart of the communicator. They have a kavana, they prepare themselves, and then they express that in speech. Lefi erech hispayla sa'adam min hasoga lekis, which means in the context that we're discussing, a contemplation, a godly contemplation. You think about something about godliness, whatever it may be. You're thinking about the world of Atzilus, or you think about unity, or you're thinking about how the tzimtzum, whatever it is, this concerted, this concentrated effort of that comes kavana shebelev lev, commensurate to that, to the hispilus, to the excitement or the stimulation of the person, as they get excited about it and they communicate it. This idea that they contemplated upon, settled in, was essentially internalized in their moyach v'lev, in a form of pnimi. So it's very clear. It's like when we learn something and we get excited by the idea. So this now has become part of your thinking. So this in turn, he says, Kein yitin kele b'dibur. In direct proportion to that will be the expression and the voice that expresses this excitement in the words. So it's commensurate to the kavana, what he calls b'techa kavana shebemeich v'lev. And you can see it. Now, in this itself, lepomim, in this itself, there are levels and variations. A person can be very much more excited and bekel ram and will raise his voice in passion and excitement. Like when someone speaks from their heart, it's coming from a deeper part of Pnimius Halev. Like you see, when someone's very excitable and very passionate about something, so their voice will reflect that. And you could see, you could have a person communicating the same idea, but in a monotone, in a far lesser prominent and in fashion. So the voice basically is saying Zakel Murkav because it's defined by the level of the excitement based on the contemplation. So it's all structured. However, in the structure itself, there's a spectrum. We can go to a higher decibel or a lower decibel. Basically what he says. So, and even when it's that way, when it's on a higher one, which means he's like very passionate about it, Im kol zeh, I'm just reading inside because it's just good to review. The im kol zeh hu murkav b'esis hadibur. Even in the higher passion, it's still murkav b'esis hadibur. The person's communicating. They're just communicating in a very passionate and exciting way. In the parentheses we discussed, and we went through it, I'll just sum it up, because the voice itself, in general, voice itself is also made up of murkav, of eish, mayim, and ruach, of a certain like warmth, a moisture, and a breath, like air. So that voice is made. That means it's murkav al-kain. That's why it's conducive to manifest in harkova. I asked the question, what do you mean a tzayka is also that way? So I'll leave that alone, that question. He doesn't answer it here. Maybe he'll refer to it, maybe not. I mean, I have my thoughts what it means, because tzayka, even if it doesn't have words, it doesn't mean it's completely soundless. There is a sound. So as soon as you have sound, you're already dealing with something of substance. However, in the sound itself, relative to expression through words, it's just a cry. So it's not a question that's impossible to answer, just pointing it out. He doesn't elaborate on that. Okay, so that's a koel murkav. The kol zeh, he sums up, hu mipnei shu koel haba ma'asagas hasechel. All this is due to the fact that this voice, this sound is coming ma'asagas hasechel, whatever that hasaga may be. It's coming from a defined comprehension, in this case about godliness, that in turn creates the commensurate to that, the excitement the person has from it. It's internalized, and then it translates into the voice that expresses. Basically, the voice is the instrument, or if you wish, the vehicle expressing the seichel dika his bonus or his saga comprehension that we've had. Avokil Pashut. I'm reading inside again, even though we learned this. So I'm reading from middle of page 1244. Avokil Pashut, but a shapeless sound. Pashut in the context, when we say again, pshitus and harkova. Harkova means it's a composite of parts. Pashut means it's shapeless or seamless in the sense it's not made up of parts. I think in chemistry, if I recall correctly, you have elements that are just are just pure, pristine elements that are not part of a composite of other things. Like water, for example, we know is H2O. It's hydrogen and oxygen. Everything is made up of different molecules. But I think there are these, what they call pure alloy. That's an alloy, I believe. I have to go back
elements.
to
the
sorry?
Elements like hydrogen or oxygen. Those are the components of water.
Water is a composite of hydrogen. You're saying hydrogen and oxygen themselves are not made. I think they're also murkav because they're made up of atoms. But relatively speaking, correct. I think in chemistry there are two types of elements. Ones that do not mix with it, that are not, even hydrogen and oxygen, I believe, have something of other parts. I'm not sure. Okay, you know what? Let me not speculate. If I find it, I find. But the point relevant to us is I'm just trying to find an example of Pashut and Murkav. So the best example is what he's saying here. So now he's going to talk about a cry that comes from the heart, but it's not expressed in any form of definitions. So he says, "Kol Pashut hu she'ena yachol liyas Murkav be'esis hadibur." It's just a cry, a kol Pashut, a voice or a sound that does not have, not made up, is coming from that shapeless place. He says is not capable of being murkav, of being a composite or a combination be'esis hadibur, in letters of speech. V'zeu heira gemura. That means because, for example, when a person's in that place, let's just take an example. Someone cries out in great joy. Their child was born, baby was born, or great joy. Their child got engaged, going to get married, or another form of joy. They just cry out, not words. So you see a tremendous joy, or God forbid, it could be the opposite, a cry of pain, where you don't have the words and saying, this is called a kol Pashut. If a person is already speaking and saying, hey, mazel tov, my child's engaged, it is also excitement. But the kol, you can't call it a kol Pashut. You're calling it a lot of excitement, but within somewhat the parameters of words. A kol Pashut would just be a cry. So he says this is the fact that it cannot be contained in words. That itself, he says, is zeu heira gemura. That's a total indication that it's coming, originating from the inner point of the heart. That's above, that transcends intelligence and reason. And that's why the koyach hasechel does not have a ability to contain it or to limit it in any way. Now, let me just explain. This doesn't mean it's not intelligent. Obviously, if a person is celebrating something and they cry out in joy, it's also coming, their mind understands it, but it's not the mind at work. It's almost like beyond the mind. That's why there's a cry. It's because it's not about a defined by an intelligent processes. That's why you see intelligent people don't just cry out. They're very deliberate, they're very measured, seasoned. The person who's learning something, they learn patiently. They can get excited, and that's what we said. It'll express itself in the excitement within their words. But a koil indicates that it's touching a part of the person that transcends and beyond actual words. And that's exactly that's the words he just said. Okay. And this is what's called psycha. This is called psycha, a cry. That a person cries suddenly, spontaneously. They cry out b'koil rash, with a loud cry, a loud voice. In a state of kol Pashut, without the cry does not have any so-called structure, in the sense of like words or letters or anything that is definable. When does that happen? When he gets excited from the depths of his heart, Meprimis nekudas alev, from the inner nekuda, the concentrated point of the heart, nekudas alev. He says nekuda because it's not hispastus in the sense where it's already developed and expanded in some ways. Nekudas alev, from the inner core, is a good word. From the inner core of the heart, that's the right word. B'yeser, increasingly from the inner core. Increasing state of that inner, a very deep place in his heart. That's higher and transcends intention and seichel. What he means by kavana here doesn't mean that the cry is coming, it's coming spontaneously. That's why he uses the word pisem, because it's not coming through strategic, it's not what's the word? It's not premeditated. It's not planned. It's just coming and expressing. You feel certain thing, you just cry out. The previous one, if you remember, he said it comes with techa kavana. You're sitting, you're contemplating, you're understanding, and that in turn, it's like when a person's going to give a speech, or going to give a shiur, or in some way express themselves. So it begins in a process of first a whole intellectual process. This is coming from that place, and that's why it's a cry. That's where we stopped. So I'll just continue from here. He's going to compare it now like the excitement or the stimulation or the arousal. Hispilus is a combination of all of that. Hispilus means excitement, someone that gets very emotionally stimulated. So he says, Hispilus fanim v'chayis. Fanim v'chayis are two types of angels. They're generally speaking three levels of angels. We say it every day in davening. You have the fanim, higher than that are the chayis HaKodesh, and higher than that are the seraphim. And we refer to them in different parts of davening and so on. Generally speaking, just for the record, Efanim, their main domain is in the world of Asiya, the lowest of the four worlds. Chayes HaKodesh, which literally means the holy energies, but it could also be Chayes is like animated. They are primarily in Yetzirah, the world of Yetzirah, and Seraphim, aimed in Mamal, Seraphim, which really means fiery entities. Seraphim is like they're burning in fiery passion. Their main domain is in Bria. Just to establish that. So when we talk about their different way of how they praise God, there's different expressions used. So he says we find by them that they say they like the hispilus, the excitement of the chayis ve'fanim hakedesh. Efanim means wheels, actually. It's like Efanim is like because they spin. That's why they're called Efanim. So they spin in their so-called serving God. But they all are, what makes them unique is that they're all examples of, for us, that's what Chassidus explains. Why do we need to know what the angels are doing? Because it's an examples of different levels of being exposed to the divine light and being excited by it. They get stimulated by it. So the Efanim is on one level, the Chayes HaKodesh on another level. Seraphim are so excited and so passionate, they're actually like burning with passion and burning with love. But he's referring now to the two lower ones. He says, their Hispilus is Berash Godel. Berash Godel, Kamesha Kosav, like it says in the Pasuk, Ve'eshma Achle Keil Rash Godel.
In
So
davening.
they make, what?
In davening.
Yeah. So, in other words, they make a lot of noise. We don't mean in a negative way. It means their passion is very expressed. It's not concealed. So it's a Rash Godel. Why is that the case? Because what's radiating upon them is radiating the divine energy or light, that is above their head, so to speak. Be above the keli, the container of their comprehension. That's why they make this Keil Rash Gadol. Shalo yuchlu she'es klal, that they cannot at all contain. Al kain, that's why yitzaku the Keil Rash Gadol. Since they can't contain, if it is containable, meaning they understand it, comprehend it, so you internalize it, and that's that. It also has impact. But here, because it's something, a gili, that is beyond them, So it causes them to get all this excitement and all this stimulation, Kel Rash Gadol, crying out with the Kel Rash Gadol, which is what he's comparing to, for us, a Kel Poshet that is higher than the containers of intelligence and kavana, intention, and words. Okay.
He's calling it pisoim, suddenly. It's not something
Yeah, we said that before. Okay, what's else? Before I continue, if anybody has any questions or comments, he's going to go now further into this topic. Any? Okay. So let's continue. So we've established there's a Kel Murkov, which is based on seichel, intelligence, and therefore manifests in words and letters, expression. There's a Kel Poshet that manifests in a cry. It's higher than the Kelim that cannot contain them, so it's a cry that comes from a deeper part of the heart. Now, and however, Beis min Tzaikus. Remember, we said before that in Tzaik itself, there's two types. Kel Rash Gadol. Remember, this all came to explain. They said in cry, there's the cry that makes a noise. There's a cry that's a silent cry. So now he's going back to that. He says, "V'omnam, beis min etzaikus, hein tzaikus hakel v'tzaikus halev." The two type in cry itself that we just described, which is higher than the kel murkav. In the kel poshet itself, there's two levels, and this is going to come explain the two levels in b'chol ma'etcha. One of expression, one through silence. So there's two levels: tzaikus hakel, a cry with a sound, and tzaikus halev, a cry from the heart. The tzaikus hakel, a tzaikus of with a voice, with the sound, hagam shezel l'mayla mahagbolas klei halev, even though, as we just explained, it transcends and above the limitations, the parameters of the containers of the heart. That's why it manifests like a cry. B'kol mokum yesh le'achize b'kli halev u'b'keiches hanefesh. It still has some grasp, some connection with the containers of the heart and the faculties of the nefesh. We used that expression, if you remember before, by b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha. The lev and nafshecha was keiches hanefesh. So in other words, in b'chol ma'edcha, let me not jump that. In the tzaika, the voice is true, it's beyond the container, but it has some relationship with it. He's going to explain why. Because a cry with a voice, a sound, a cry with sound. When you compare it to Kel Murkov, it's clearly poshet, it's shapeless. But when you compare it to Atzmish Ala Nefesh, to the core of the soul, when you compare it to the core of the soul, it's a greater revelation than the voice that comes, that's murkav, a composite bedibur in speech. It's more intense, and therefore a greater revelation. Mashenkin b'kel poshet, she'ena mugbal. I'm sorry, I skipped the line. The b'kel zeh ein bo izgalus hanefesh kol kach. Because in the koil that manifests in speech, it doesn't have the revelation of the nefesh in an undiluted way that much. Only in a state of the diminished state and the limited state, or tzimtzum would be a concentrated state or concealed state, and a diminished state, commensurate, kafi, hagbolas haseichel, like we said. So basically, if you think of it this way, if the nefesh itself, atzmis hanefesh, no sound at all, no voice, think of that as a infinite field of energy. It's a force of energy. On the other extreme, we have our faculties that's coming from the nefesh, but they're very defined, whatever they may be. The power of sight, the power of sound. So when you express something from your nefesh, it's coming from your heart. It could be different levels, as we said. It could be dvarim hayetzim min halev. It could be more superficial. But as it's coming, it's now being channeled It's not expressing the full intensity and the full expansion of the very nefesh of the person. It's coming in an expressed way. The seichel guides it, the seichel creates it, and it turns into an expressed way of a koil murkov that has its limits. Mashenki in a koil pashut, he's going to say, even the one with sound, we're talking now the lower level, the koil pashut. Mashenki b'koil pashut she'ena mugbal b'hagbalas hameich v'alev, whereas a koil pashut that's not defined and not limited by the parameters of the moyach, of the mind and the heart. So that tells you that it's revealing more of the nefesh. So it's like to be the difference between, let's say, water that's trickling from a faucet or water that's flowing in a much more expansive way straight from the reservoir. So they're both coming from Atzmis HaNefesh. Everything originates there. But one is a very limited flow and one is a very expansive flow. So it's more is Galus HaNefesh. And also therefore the other side as well. That's why it's not because it goes both ways. It's not because Dibur doesn't limit it, because it's coming from such a place. That's why it cannot be contained by the definitions and the composite of letters and words of speech. However, and here's going to be now the limit. This is compared to Murkov. However, his galuzeis eina atzmis hanefesh mamish. This koil poshet is not a revelation of the very core of the soul. It's a greater revelation from there than voice of words and the sound of with words, but it's not atzmis hanefesh mamish. Rak ha'oras hanefesh. It's only a reflection of the soul. Now, I pointed out many times in Ayin Beis, he always uses the word mamish, not mamish. You could talk about atzmis hanefesh and atzmis hanefesh mamish. So he's saying it's not atzmis hanefesh mamish. In the atzmis hanefesh, it's a reflection of it. However, he qualifies. However, Elo she'ena ora bo b'chinas er pnimi. It's not a reflection that comes in a internalized and imminent way, which is koil dibur. Speech, he said clearly, is coming from the mind and the heart, our understanding and feeling something that's very containable and very integrated and internalized. Here, it's a reflection. It's not etzem, but it's not er pnimi either. It doesn't come in an internalized way. That's why it's not defined by words and letters. Shezeh ba b'derech tzimtzum and hanefesh. Because er pnimi is coming in a form of tzimtzum, in order to be tailored and to be customized according to the particular idea or feeling that is being expressed, which is what words of speech accomplish. Ki'im, so what is it if it's not er pnimi, then what it's not etzem, what is it? Ki'im hi ha'ora ma'atzmis hanefesh. It's a reflection from the core of the soul. Let me explain this. We learned in volume 1, in Ayin Beis, generally speaking, you talk about er ha'gvul, er ha'bli gvul, and then there's the etzem. In a different language, mamala kalalman, sevav kalalman, and the etzem. Mamala kalalman is the divine energy that manifests within existence. Command, like when Hashem says, "Asara ma'moris nivra elam," Yehi oir, let there be light. Light is not heaven. Light is not vegetation. When Hashem says Yehi rakia, that's a very specific thing. He's actually expressing words, divine energy manifesting in particular words, which in turn create and energize that particular creation. As the Alter Rebbe explains in Shaykh V'Amunah, that even though there's 10 statements like that, 10 words, 10 expressions, but all the letters of the Hebrew alphabet are contained in there, and different combinations and permutations create everything. Like he says later in Shaykh Even. It doesn't say Yehi Even, there should be a stone, but Even is a combination of letters that God uses to create. That's Mamala Kalam. And with that you have Chachma, Bina, Das. They're different levels. How could they be different levels? Obviously God can do anything, but he wanted it to be. So the energy, it's like energy that's flowing toward different appliances, if you wish. The electricity itself is shapeless, but it enters each appliance according to its needs. Here it's even more than that, actually, because electricity remains shapeless even when it enters an appliance. Here, the letters actually fit in, they're mislabish. They manifest. That's mamala kalam. Sevav kalalman is makif. It means, as the Alter Rebbe explains, doesn't mean it's outside of. He says surrounds. It means that the energy that's flowing is not tailored to the particular object, so the object feels like it's outside of me. It senses that maybe something there, but it's not internalized. That's usually compared to rotzen. The koyachas hanefesh are the faculties of the soul. That's pnimim. Each koyach has its location. Koyach hachachma, koyach habina, the power of chachma, the chesed, gvura, teferes, koyach hariyah in the eyes, koyach hashmiyah in the ears, and the same and above in the ishtalshlus. Sevav is like rotzen, the will, the desire, which can be anywhere, the desire to see, the desire to hear, the desire to think, to contemplate, etc. So that's Sevav Kalam. So, but you still say Sevav is not Etzem. Etzem is when you talk about the divine that is not in any way manifest, not internalized and not transcendent. Sometimes we refer to the Er HaGvul is an immanent internalized energy. Er HaBligvul, Er HaSevav is Er HaBligvul, a transcendent energy. But the Etzem you can't even define by the word transcendence. So Etzem you say is completely beyond it all. So what he's saying here is, going back to this, Koil and Dibur is a good example for Er Pnimi, because it's manifest, Seichel, it comes into words, it's expressed, both Hashem's Dibur, God's Dibur, and our Dibur, because you can compare the two. Now, the Koil Poshet, he says, with sound, is a more of a Hizgalus HaNefesh, of the Etzem HaNefesh than Dibur, because it's not tailored, it's not defined, but it's still not Etzem HaNefesh, it's only Ha'orah from the Etzem HaNefesh. Ha'orah ma'atzmis HaNefesh. Aval im kol zeh, but together with this, and im kol zeh, simultaneously, or im kol zeh, nevertheless, harizeh rak ha'orah mispashetes min HaNefesh. So it's not er pnimi, it's not an internalized energy. It's a reflection of the core more than that. So it's a ha'orah from the atzmis nefesh, but it's still ha'orah hamispashetes min HaNefesh. In other words, it has a maila, the quality that it's shapeless and therefore closer to the etzem HaNefesh, but it's only a reflection. But it's a ha'orah hamispashetes that extends from the nefesh. V'hainu, what does that mean? What is he adding with that? He's saying v'hainu, shehi rak ispashtus v'izgalos hanefesh. It's only the extension, the extension, and the revelation of this nefesh of the soul, shemispashet be'ezeh davar, that extends itself in some manner. In other words, you can't say it's completely unlimited. Compared to voice of sound of words, it's unlimited. But here it does manifest in some way. And that's why it says, Valkain, Yeshloi Achiza Adayin B'Klei Halev. It still has some grasp, some connection with the containers of the heart. Not in a limited way, but some connection. Shetzoyeg B'Kel Rash, it cries out with a loud noise, with loudly, a loud cry, Ubizgalish Yisera, and with an increased revelation. Remember, he was speaking about the Chol Moedcha earlier that way, right? That part that we're talking now, that is even more Izgalos. When a person speaks, even a passionate message, it still has a limit because it's words. When you cry out, the passion and the expression is more revealed and more intense. And yet it's not Atzmis HaNefesh, it's an extension, a reflection of that Atzmis HaNefesh. Now he's going to the other tzayka, a cry from the heart that does not have any sound. Hu shalev atzmei tziyak v'kola, that the heart itself is crying out. V'kola here is, Rabbi, from the word kiloyin. It's like how would I say Kiloin here? Belishum Kelegamri. It's crying. Expires. Like, in other words, here, on the other hand, it's going to be deeper, but there's less expression in a revealed way without any voice at all. And I'll explain this in a minute. Let's just read it on top of page 1245. For whom negeya or shenogaloi hadover b'pnimius nafshe, because this matter has touched him and reached and pierced him in pnimius nafshe, in inner the yesel, increasingly in the pnimius nafshe b'yesel, ad she'en biyacholte litzek klal, to the point that he cannot cry out at all, meaning cry out with the sound. Ukamoi, b'tzar pnimi rachmana litzlan, when a person has a very deep inner pain, like grief, real deep grief, hanegele be'etzem nafshe mamish, that touches him and it reaches him, it pierces him. In mamish, in his etzem nafshe, literally in the core of his very spirit, the soul. V'hainu loy medover hazulas memenu. Ki me'etzem atzmei u'mehusei mamish. I think what he means by saying that, he's saying it's not coming from something outside of him, but it's really touching his very kima atzem atzmei mehusei mamish. It's coming from his very inner core. Like, for example, I think he means, just to give an example, let's say you hear about a tragedy that happens to someone else. So yes, so it's going to touch you, but it's coming from something outside of you. And it touches you. Here we're talking about it touches him. The words he uses again, me'etzem atzmei u'mehusei mamish, meaning it's coming from within his very core and innermost personality. So when a person is in that state, Rahman al-Islam, like he said, God forbid, does not have the capacity, the ability to cry at all. Like someone who faints from great grief and pain. So there's no cry, the opposite happens. They completely overwhelmed and they can't even express themselves and they faint. The EF Shalaheshiv Nafshe, and you cannot revive him, revive his spirit, only with a lot of effort, increased effort. And when you finally do revive him, immediately he again returns and faints again. This is very rare. You're going to hear such an emotional expression in my martyrdom. But clearly the Rebbe Rashab is talking here about serious pain, serious grief, where a person can't even stay conscious. And even when you revive him, which takes a lot of effort, he faints again. What's the reason for this? Zehu, this is due to the fact that it's mahazozes atzmos hanefesh mamish. The very core of this person's soul has been hazozah. It means to move. But it's a limited word, the word move. Hazaza means a lot more than movement. It means your very essence was shaken up. That's what it means. That's the best way I can define it. The very core of the person has been literally shaken. Shemispol ba'atzmei, that he's within himself. He's this mispol here is not excitement, but mispol means affect the emotional, shaken up, startled is too weak. Emotional spilus. This has no grasp and no connection at all with the containers of the heart. Not even like the kol pasha that cries out with a sound, has some expression. This is coming in a place that there's no expression, and it does not have any connection to the kalim of the lev, the containers of the heart. That's why it comes not through any transmission and revelation like the lower level of the kol pasha, that at least expresses itself in sound, in a cry. Rak b'tzaikus halev, only a cry from the heart. Loy b'tzaikus hakol klal, not a cry with any voice at all. A voiceless cry from the innermost part of the heart. So this is the second and higher level of the Kel Pashut. Like he said, that there are two levels. So let me just explain it a bit. I think it's pretty clear, but I just let me explain it with a little context. It's something I talk about a lot in many classes. It's an interesting phenomenon, and it also helps understand a lot of Inyanim and Chassidus. That if someone asks you to speak about something superficial, surface, the weather, sports, nonsense, people speak and could speak forever. Look, just turn on the radio, talk radio. They talk and talk and talk. If someone asks you to say something, tell me what's in your deeper part of your heart. What are you feeling? A more intimate. Share something from within you, not whether it's going to rain today or it's going to snow or it's going to be cold or hot. You'll find it's harder to express that, which seems initially counterintuitive, because the more closer it is to you, the more you should be able to express. If it's something superficial, how many words can you already talk about? How much can you talk about the weather? And yet we find that it's easy. We have more words to talk about less content, and the deeper it's in your heart, the harder it is to express. So we have language. We use language like I'm using right now. Language is like containers. Containers can only contain that much energy. It's like if I want to fill up a cup with water, there's only that amount of water that can fit into a cup. The cup is larger, I could put more water into it. Same thing with letters. Letters at the end of the day are containers. They're extremely valuable because without it, there's no communication. But what are they containing? They're containing limited energy. That's why regular speech itself has a limited flow of content or oir. Now, in this dvarim hayetzim min halev, words that come from the heart, like he said, bring more passion and more energy coming from within you. So you see the passion, the expression, dvarim hayetzim min halev, nichnasim el halev, words that come from the heart, enter the heart. Words that come out of the mouth or the brain go into one ear and out the other. So you see there that the communication, it's still words, but the words are a little more expansive. So they bring more of you into it. So you're not just, many of us when we speak, especially with a stranger, you're not going to just open up. You're going to give them a little limited flow of what's going on inside your feelings. A smart person doesn't just show their feelings or their innermost thoughts. This is outer expression, but then you can express more. But there comes a point where even if you're comfortable with someone else and you trust them and you're ready to communicate with them deeper ideas and feelings and so on, words will ultimately be inadequate at times. Not just at times. The deeper you go, the less words will work. That's why you have the expression liba lepuma legalia. That which is in the heart of a person cannot be expressed in the mouth. Yes, you can express dvarim hayetzim min halev to a limit, but there's always like when someone says to you, I can't fully tell you what I'm feeling. I can tell you a bit, I'll give you a little taste of it. But what I'm really feeling inside, I don't really have words. So then what we do, how do we express it? So either you could say that, or more than that, there's a thing called metaphor. You use metaphors, like poetry, just using secular examples. Poetry, I remember as a child, I used to always ask everyone, my teachers, my parents, why does it have to be so cryptic? Why don't they just write it out like a normal sentence? Why does poetry have to be so, like the use of words, you have to... But then you come to realize because it's allowing you to express deeper feelings that regular language won't, just like a song. Sometimes, like the Alter Rebbe said, when you ask a question, you don't have an answer, tell a story. Why? Because a story conveys more of a personal experience. People relate to people like themselves. Whereas an idea may not resonate quite as much. And then he continued, and if that doesn't work, the story, sing a song. What does a song do? We all know a nigun touches deeper the heart. It's kol masalev. What is a song? I'm not talking about a song with words necessarily. The tune, the very melodic nature, has something that touches us. It's hard to explain. There's something that even a newborn child, even a child in pregnancy, they say responds to song. So song touches us deeper than words. Now, the words communicate better. They tell us the details. But a song, I'm just pointing out how the containers now have to be widened if you want to have deeper expression. Because the containers of words are just too limited. Okay, now let's go to the next step. That's still, however, a song. Even deeper than that is you can't even express it in any way except a cry. Oy vey. I mean, in a bad way or in a good way. Wow. These are words we use when we don't have words. We want to express a very powerful feeling, and it's not even deliberate. It could just be a cry, like he said, spontaneous. It suddenly happens. Now, this one cry can contain more volumes than an entire book because its intensity is far stronger, but its container is very limited. So this goes to the rule that Chassidus says, more energy, less container. Less energy, more container. The more the containers are there, the smaller the energy. The less the containers are there, the more possible. Where there's more energy, there'll be less containers. Just to give you an example, a beautiful example Chassidus gives, look at the human body. Where are our superior organs and faculties? In the head. Our brain, our sight, our sound, our speech. It's like everything is in the head. As you work your way down in the body, yes, we need a heart and we have a liver and lungs and everything else. But here's the interesting thing Chassidus says. So why is it that the head is the smallest part of the body? It has so much energy in it. It should be the largest part of the body. The torso or the chest, the guf, remember we read Reish Guf Regel. The guf has less faculties, so it should be smaller. The legs have the least faculties, so they should be the smallest. And we see the exact opposite. So Chassidus answers, because wherever there's more air, there's less keli. Wherever there's less air, there's more keli. So the legs, which is half the body, they're important, but they're not as vital as you can say the brain or the heart. So just to point out, like it's what we call in Chassidus is akudim, nekudim vrudim. And akudim, the energy is so intense, there's only one small container. Eser eres b'klei echad, akud b'klei echad, bound in one, like a one cell. Like when upon conception you have one cell, in it it's concentrated everything that will develop into the child that develops in the fetus. Then comes a state where they become 10 energies in 10 containers, but they're still chaotic and radical. They can't coexist. Then comes tikkun, nevrudim. The eris and kelim are perfectly measured and commensurate to each other. I'm just elaborating a bit because it's a very fundamental concept. But bringing it back to our discussion here, is one more step. A cry or a laugh. You know, a laugh. When the Alter Rebbe was being interrogated in prison, they asked him a lot of questions. And he answered each one very beautifully, and they saw who they're dealing with. The last question is, how do you explain the end of chapter 1 in your Tanya, where you write about the non-Jews? So the Alter Rebbe didn't answer, he laughed. And that was satisfied, it satisfied them. There's a discussions, what did he mean? What did they understand? But sometimes a laugh, like a cry, can capture more than an entire chapter, entire book, for the same reason. But then there's one more level. It's called kola de lo yishtama. He doesn't use that expression here, but it's the same idea where he said, like by the shofar, kola de lo yishtama, the Zohar says, a voice that is not heard. It's so silent. It's so intense that even the keli of a sound, a laugh, a cry, like we said, a loud cry is also too much.
Is this sakas a left?
I'm in the middle of speaking. Let me finish.
No, my question is the same thing.
No, I'm not going to take a question right now. People are listening. I'm trying to explain an idea, and I'm not just speaking with you. So let me finish, and then you could ask whatever you wish. So now, this is a soundless cry, because even sound, not words, song, everything I mentioned, here it's so intense, the oyer, that there's no keli at all. But ironically, this is the deepest expression. So here's a fundamental concept that is critical when you learn Chassidus. The deeper and higher you go, the harder it is to express. So you have to use new tools because we are accustomed to expression. We want definitions. That's what everybody wants. Everyone wants definitions. We need definitions, parameters, structures, so on. Here we learn that the opposite happens. The deeper you go into the core of who you are, the less definition you're going to have. Definition, in other words, is containers. So that's what he's saying now is that psychos halev, that no koil at all. And he actually gives this example. That's why you see when people suffer a tragedy, this is known. The first thing is shock. They can't even cry. It takes days for them to begin to cry. I mean, each person their way. It's complete shock to the point, like you said, a person can pass out and you can't revive them because it's so overwhelming. It's so deep and touch their core, like he says, hazazas, shakes them up from the core. There's nothing, no expression at all. Then in any type of cathartic healing situation, you need to make sure that at some point they cry, they express, because you don't want them to just bury that pain. It's important to express itself. That's why you have grief counseling and all that. But it's the second stage. I mean, no one should know of this, God forbid. But he's using that example here because it's the strongest example to show something without any form of expression. Now, on the positive side, that's the psychos halev, that when the core essence of a soul is connecting to God, no expression at all, no words, no sounds, but at the same time, it's the deepest. Now you could already see how he's setting the stage to explain the questions he asked about B'chol Ma'itcha and how important this is in the whole discussion of Mudva Murgish Muskel, because you begin first with tangible emotions, behavioral. Then you move to tangible emotions and the cognitive and the going out to the highest levels. So we're going to, obviously he's going to tie it all together, but you could see how this is building up and how critical this is in the whole understanding of this topic. Okay, with that, I'll stop here. And then to the paragraph. And I'm sorry, I know people listening, I just don't want to confuse anyone. That's why I want to just finish what I said, and then I'm happy to take questions.
It's okay. It's not so important. You said it's called Kol the Lo Ishtamo. I wanted to know if Tzakas Alev is not deeper than Kol the Lo Ishtamo, because in Tzakas Alev there is no Tzakas Akoil Klau.
Well, Kol the Lo Ishtamo means that it means the same. I don't know that he doesn't make distinction. I would have to look. General is definitely the similar level. Is there, when you go subtly even more, the Kol Lo Ishtamo means there's a sound, but it's not making a sound. I hear you. I think Kol Lo Ishtamo means both things, both a sound that's soundless and also a level that's completely beyond sound. But you know what? I would have to look that up.
Okay, he's not mentioning here Kol Lo Ishtamo.
No, I said that he doesn't mention. I just use it because in the progression where we go from words to like a metaphor, song, and so on, I just wanted to give the whole structure. But anybody has...
You explain it fascinating. Very, very cool.
I have a question, please.
Go ahead.
When we're talking about this deepest level internally, it's basically the Atzmus HaNefesh. So there's such an intensity of feeling there's no sound, there's no way to express it, and then I'm likening this to like B'chol Me'odecha, where it's above. It's
B'chol Me'odecha is going to be the next paragraph.
Right.
The Rebbe Rashab is going to directly talk about it.
So here's my question. If going back to the emotional maturation process that we've spent the past couple of weeks learning about, and we talk about the highest level is the zivug of Chachma Bina in the Nakuda of Elokus. At that level, which seems to be the same as B'chol Me'odecha and the same idea of this Atzmus HaNefesh. In that level,
let me just stop you. That's all going to be addressed later. I mean, there's no point. I'm not going to speculate on that now because the Rebbe Rashab is going to come back to tie it all together, just for the record. So all this will be tied together. There's no reason to go there.
I'm not going. I haven't asked my question yet. I'm trying to correlate what we previously learned to what we're learning here. My question
I
is,
say to you, I can't comment on that because the Rebbe Rashab is going to correlate it himself. So I'm just telling you that. But fine, go ahead.
okay, well, maybe you can't answer the question, but the question is, in this example of this, let's say, God forbid, this level of suffering of where the person can't even make a sound, they're so upset. It's touching them in an internal way that's very tangibly related to reality, and so it's almost like the self. It's not the neshama that's above the self.
Right.
Well, you would think that if something is coming from the atzmus and nefesh, from the chelik elakam mamish, that it would not be affected by some.
Chelik elakam mamish was not mentioned here at all, so I would not use that at all here. It doesn't belong here. But go ahead. It's coming from the very core, correct?
Well, the core of one's soul, you would think, would be higher than what happens in one's immediate surrounding. It wouldn't be as affected. We talk about bittul is the nullification of self.
I hear the question. I hear the question. Well, I think I would wait till he continues because he's talking about the core of the soul in a very simple way. If somebody scratches your finger, it doesn't touch the core of your soul. When there's a tremendous tragedy, a loss in a family, it's going to touch the core of your soul. That's the context of what he's saying here. He's not going to an analysis of the levels of the soul that go back to places that are altogether beyond human experience. He's definitely talking in the human experience level. In human experience, there are things that you can express in words. There are things you can express in a sound, a cry. And there are things that are so deep, they're coming from the deepest part. But he didn't even do it. Etzem HaNefesh is a very broad term. Etzem HaNefesh, you could talk about all kinds of things that are. Here he's talking about in that context of human experience or even divine experience that does have an experience, or else it doesn't touch the person altogether. We're talking about here where a person is having an experience. The question is if the experience has any expression.
Okay, I get it. So it may not be the core of the divine experience per se.
It's a whole different discussion. What you're asking now is really goes back to fundamentals of Chassidus. We're not talking about the core that does not that we're talking about core experiences within existence as we know it. We're not talking about atzmus now that is completely beyond everything and built in mitzias nimtza. We are talking here etzem hanefesh. There are things that touch the very core of a person, like we speak about yechida shebenefesh, neshama, like Yom Kippur, things that touch the deepest parts of our soul. The word deepest is a very relative term.
Okay, thank you. You answered my question. Thank you.
Okay, good. Any other questions?